All right. So I'm going to talk a little bit about Fly. I'm going to save that till the end. I'm mainly going to talk about what we've done with V8. So this is actually pretty hardcore JavaScript for a hardcore group. I am Kurt.
Hi, Kurt.
Yeah, thank you. Company called Fly.io. My previous company was called Mongo HQ. We changed our name to Compose. Then we sold that to IBM, which turned out to be an awful place to work. So I quit.
Really?
Oh yeah, I would not go to IBM.
No, you sold that to IBM.
Oh yeah.
Well done.
Yes, thank you. It's a little bit like selling a child. So it has its pluses, obviously, and then it has its like dreadful bits too. I've never sold a child. I just think it might.
Some things like selling a child.
Yeah, I imagine for people who sell children, they have a very similar set of feelings as I did.
Fair enough.
Before Compose, I worked for a company called Ars Technica. This one wasn't great for me, but we got bought by Condé Nast. I worked there a long time. And actually, a lot of what we're doing for Fly came out of what drove me nuts at Condé Nast, which was that CDNs, I hope everyone's familiar with CDNs, like Fastly, Cloudflare, all these places. They just didn't do anything. Like they distributed really static images, but it seemed like there were a whole lot more problems they could solve to let me run fewer servers and to handle more traffic. So at Ars Technica, we'd have several million people visit on a normal day, and then we'd have like an Apple event, and 20 million people would come. And it seemed kind of silly to have the server capacity for that, just because of that one day, effectively. So yeah, that's all my credentials, I guess. And basically what we're talking about right now, and this is kind of the segue into the Fly thing, what we've done is we've built a CDN that runs your code. And the idea is we distribute JavaScript applications to the edge, which is buzzwordy. We don't do blockchains, we do edge. That's our buzzword for the night. We distribute your JavaScript out to all our servers that are currently in 16 data centers. When a request comes in, we boot and run your app. Actually, from the time we get a request until we're running your code is less than a millisecond. And the way we've accomplished this is by embedding V8 and basically building a JavaScript runtime within our JavaScript runtime. We just happen to do this in Node, V8 C++. You could do it in a lot of different languages. For us, for a lot of reasons we'll talk about later, the Node was a really nice way to do this. There's actually a lot of really interesting reasons you might want to embed V8, particularly in Node apps. The biggest one for us is a little bit of why our company exists, is you can't give people all of the config options they could ever imagine. At some point, particularly if you're servicing developers, at some point you're better off just letting them write code, because you can't really predict what they're going to want to do with it. They'll frequently surprise you with what they come up with. We had a customer that basically injects responsive images in HTML as it goes through. Because if you've ever done responsive image markup, it's not a thing a human should write. It's pretty obvious what it's doing, but it's really difficult to do consistently. And so they wrote this little bit of code that takes HTML, rewrites the HTML for responsive images, and actually optimizes the images as they pass through, which kind of blew my mind. Even World of Warcraft embeds not V8, but Lua. Similar concept. It's like, well, we're going to build this cool world. We want to let people have a lot more control of what we're doing. I actually just like this bit of code because it starts with a death frame, which seems properly dramatic. So a lot of why you embed V8 is to give people more power than you can give them with checkboxes and config files and all those things. There's other reasons too. One of the interesting effects of doing this is it lets you actually create a multi-threaded environment for Node. So you can, the way the V8 stuff is implemented, and we'll talk about isolates. The first thing you know about V8 is they have a thing called isolates, which is effectively the JavaScript virtual machine. And it has its own memory allotment, has its own heap, has its own stack, has its own boundaries. You can't actually get out of an isolate. It's kind of a virtualized runtime for JavaScript. The way it's usually implemented, each isolate's its own thread, if not a process. So within Node, you could actually spin up 15 different isolates and do a really highly concurrent parallel thing if you're running into event loop issues like you can. So it's kind of interesting. There's a big long example that won't fit on the screen, but I'd encourage you to check out. The guy who wrote the library we're using wrote a parallelized sort function that basically takes 3 JavaScript functions, put them all into different isolates, and starts handing things back and forth. It's very cool. An isolate in V8, if you use Chrome or Opera or any of these browsers that do WebKit, an isolate is basically the tab for the most part. This isn't always true, but you can imagine an isolate is, I've opened a tab, that tab gets a V8 isolate. Within each isolate is something called a context, which is like a JavaScript origin. So if you load something from Google, and then you load one of their 47 tracking properties from a different origin, each one of those little bits of JavaScript will get their own context. And contexts are actually where you isolate V8 code. It's mildly confusing because you create an isolate and then you create a context for your isolated bits of code. Partition, they will call it that. And the reason you do this is because if you load JavaScript from a third party, it shouldn't be able to access first-party cookies. It shouldn't necessarily be able to talk into iframes. There's a lot of things that you want to restrict security-wise for that. Code and context can't escape in the same way that code in any secure environment can't escape. Like code always escapes. That's why we have Spectre and all these other things that we get to watch every time. The point of this is more that like the V8 authors are actively trying to keep this jail pretty secure. So this is the one thing you need to take away from V8 is isolates and contexts. The interesting thing about V8 is what it doesn't do. It has like basically nothing in it. You get the JavaScript primitives, you get like the math library, but you can't fetch this. If you haven't seen the fetch API, fetch is the WG API for it's nicer than XHR. So you can't fetch stuff. If you actually run this app, you get that error down below, which says, I don't know what fetch is. Why would I want to do that? You can't write to the console. It actually has the API for console in V8. It just doesn't do anything. So if you run it, you get no output until you build your own console. You can't load libraries because, again, require is a thing that's been implemented by other people. So good luck requiring like other chunks of code in your V8. You can't import because that's a keyword it doesn't know. You have to build that as well. And you can't always even run JavaScript. Basically, the big problem with V8 is as soon it has no event loop. It has no way of like picking up execution. So if you run a synchronous bit of code, it'll happily do that. If you do anything async, it just exits. It doesn't know that it's supposed to be doing this. So if you start a promise async, it doesn't wait around for the promise to return. It adds it onto what's called a microtask queue, and then expects you, the author of the kind of the host thing, to manage the microtasks. It was kind of hilarious. And in fact, you'll see in some of my examples this really dirty hack to make this work. But the point is that V8 is a JavaScript compilation and like execution kind of environment, and it doesn't do anything else. So when you start trying to embed this thing, you actually need to be really careful about what you want to expose to your users. The really nice thing about it is it's kind of perfect for what we do because by default it doesn't do anything, which means we can be really careful not to expose stuff to people that we don't want to be giving them. So the big question is how do you actually start putting batteries into your V8? And obviously you find a wizard to start. There's a guy named Marcel who's written an open source node library called Isolated VM. And it does a lot of the garbage that you need to do to run V8. It maps all the stuff back to the node event loop. It has primitives for copying like pointers to buffers and copying strings back and forth between isolates. And it lets you do things like copy function references around, which we'll implement in a second. And then you also have to become a wizard. So he has all that, but it's still like console.log doesn't work. So you need to actually start designing an API. And one of the big wins for us was just kind of realizing we should just use existing in-browser APIs for the stuff we need, because there's polyfills that are pure JavaScript that do a lot of this. And it's also, designing an API is hard. If you can just do something that's a spec, people will know what it is and then hopefully be happy that they made it easy for them to write this stuff. So we're going to make some of those things I just showed you work.
Hey, Kurt.
Yes.
So the one statement you had on that last slide was something about like this node package makes it easy to work with V8, a node app.
Yes.
Isn't Node built on V8?
Yes, it is. So Node is actually V8 plus IO plus an event loop. And in fact, this package uses the exact same V8 library that Node does. And Node actually has a VM module that lets you use V8, but it's not really great for multi-user stuff. So this is a really nice way to use V8 as it was intended from within Node. So yes, the answer is yes. And actually, I'll show you the demo, because what's funny about this? Go ahead.
You've embedded V8
In V8.
running it in V8.
Yes.
I heard you like V8.
Yes, it's V8. It's V8 all the way down.
V8.
What's actually funny about this is when we start to scale this, I think the Node part might go away. Like we might drop to lower level C++ or Rust for like the proxy bits we do, but keep all the V8 environment the same. So the nice thing about using V8 in this way is it's just JavaScript. It's not all that different from everything else you're writing. The complicated thing is that it gets confusing to know which bits of JavaScript you're looking at, and which one's on which side of the boundary. So for my demo, I actually wrote the Node side in TypeScript, which I hope everyone is. TypeScript's relatively easy to look at if you know Node or if you know JavaScript. And then I wrote the V8 bits in just pure JavaScript. The first thing I'm going to show you here is this is just using the isolated VM library. So like all the script is doing is reading a source file, trying to run it. Line 14 here, we're actually creating our first isolate. We're giving it a memory limit. It's really, really good about limiting how much memory someone can use. And then down here, we're going to go ahead and create the context. And the very bottom here, we compile the script, all sync functions for demo purposes. This is probably not what you do in real life. And then run the script sync, so it actually runs before it kills the thing. So this is a really simple thing, but as I mentioned, it doesn't actually. It doesn't work because we have no library. So I've run some JavaScript, I've verified that it might run, but I've also gotten an error. And then you can see even like the console log thing doesn't do anything. That worked, obviously. It did exactly what I wanted. It didn't crash. So this is our simple, very simple implementation. The more fun one is exactly the same thing, basically. So right down here at line 21 is exactly the same last line. The difference is we're going to go ahead and bootstrap our context to give it an API. And so the first thing we're going to implement here is a console log function. So our bootstrap function, it takes the context we created, it takes the isolate. The isolate's actually responsible for compiling the code. It's very fast to create new context with the same code within an isolate, which is nice. So you need both of those, really. And the very first thing we do here is we grab the global reference from the context. So you know a JavaScript environment, there's always a global. So what we're actually doing is saying, I want to start working with that global here. And we're calling it jail just to make it obvious what we're looking at here. Next thing we're doing is we're going to pass the isolated VM reference into the V8, because isolated VM controls handling stuff back and forth. So you actually need the same reference on both sides so it can know what it's doing. So we're setting that as just a temporary variable. And then we're going to create a log function that's also a temporary variable. And what this is doing is it's just a normal function call, and it's actually just passing a callback. The special thing about this callback is we're wrapping it in an IBM reference. And what this does is it tells V8, look, go ahead and tell us to call this function using this reference, and then we'll figure out how to actually do the whole closure bit. And so all we're doing here is appending V8 to it, so we know where it's coming from, and then we're actually just calling console.log. It's relatively simple so far. The interesting thing here is that's only half the problem, and we've taken to calling these bridge functions. So that basically what we talk about is bridging from Node to V8, or from the host to the client runtime. And then the other half of this needs to actually be done within V8, and this is where we actually expose the API to our developers. So the very first thing we do is we grab this global global IBM reference, put it in a private variable that's in that closure, and then delete it, because we don't want anyone touching this. This is the way we sort of sandbox the bridge functions back and forth. We do the same thing for the log variable. We make it a private one, and then we delete the global variable. And then we create a new global for console.log. And all this does is it's just a kind of a dumb function that calls apply ignore. This apply is very similar to like function.apply in JavaScript. It takes the this object and then an array of arguments to pass through it. In our case, we're just going to use a simple little one-liner. And if you haven't seen the shorthand for these kind of functions, this is just a shorthand for making a function that takes an argument and then returns a new reference into it. In this case, for IBM, what we also do is we call copy into, which actually tells IBM when you run this in a different context, go ahead and copy the data into the context when it needs it. It's weird to me that you call copy into when you send something, but it kind of makes sense. You're just telling it it's allowed to be copied when it's used effectively. So all we're doing is mapping all the arguments to copies, which now, yes?
Just curious, seems like you've got like a mix of like ES5 stuff and ES6 stuff. I'm wondering, is there a need for the ES5 stuff, like a lot of these function declarations and stuff?
So for like callback type stuff versus promises, or for?
I thought I saw another example, but just like where you were creating a variable of some sort as a, using the function keyword, instead of just
Oh.
fat arrows.
Yeah, so
And then you have fat arrows in other places. I'm wondering if there's a
yeah,
reason for that.
the fat arrows, like typically, so the fat arrows also imply who
The
this
context,
is.
yeah.
But so typically I use fat arrow. I like fat arrows when it's like literally a one-liner. The problem, we've actually found that like I like named functions too because you get way better stack traces. So typically we'll do named functions for stuff that like we might need to debug, and the fat arrows for things that are.
So this is mostly just preference.
It's mostly just preference. None of this. Actually, we'll get to promises in a second because one of the nice things about V8 is you can do just modern JavaScript and you don't have to do callbacks, for example. But for this it's all just preference so far. I want to go look and see how inconsistent it is. So we have our full thing, and then what we're going to do here is hope that console log works, right? And look at that, V8 says hello. And then you also notice it waited 3 seconds before returning. And what I'm doing there is giving later asynchronous code time to finish before the process ends. It's a nasty hack. It's not how you do it in real life, but for this, everything can happen within 3 seconds. And so this is that. I guess I can show you that example again. Oops. That's just console log. This is just running within the context, just like you'd use it. And then it's calling back through this bootstrap function, which ultimately calls back to our node host process. A more interesting one is fetch, and this is where things get really interesting. If you're doing things like streaming, you actually get a lot of chatter back and forth between the isolates. For this example, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to stream. We're just going to buffer a whole body. But I'm going to do a basic fetch implementation. And this one is going to be down here. So I named this function just because it kept exploding on me and I wanted to see what it's doing. Fetch is going to, I just made this take a string, and all we're going to do is a get. It's not going to do anything all that spectacular for this purpose. I did make it detect whether it was SSL or not because I kept changing which one I was trying. And then what we're doing down here is this is a normal node HTTP request. So we're creating a request with the URL. We're giving it our callback response, creating the body, buffering the body when we start getting data. And then when it ends, what we're actually going to do is create all the stuff we need to send back into V8. In this case, we're going to make a sort of a simple object, but it's not just a JavaScript primitive. So this is going to have the stuff that I think we might care about in V8. We want the HTTP response, we want the headers. Ultimately, we want the body. Body's null here because in this log I kept getting these huge logs that I didn't want to look at, so we just set that after I log. And then we call callback apply, just like we did before, to send this stuff back into V8. The difference here is we need to go ahead and JSON to stringify our response because it doesn't know what to do with a JavaScript object. You need to give it something more low level than that. For speed purposes, what you'd probably do is like a shared array buffer here because you don't really want to be copying data in memory for this type of stuff, but for strings are just really easy to look at. And then I just did it simple, like a normal callback that takes error, null if there's no error, and then the actual result of the function here. So if there is an error, we're going to go ahead and tell V8 there was an error. So all that's relatively simple, other than this IBM reference up here that I just lost.
So you're taking nodes HTTP and using it to create
implement
fetch for V8 to understand fetch.
Correct. Which, if you think about it, it's exactly what Node does.
Doing, but it's
another layer. Yes.
Yeah, this is very Inception-like.
It is, and what it is really fast. Yeah, it's all in. Actually, I'll show you what we actually run later too. It's all you can download. I'll give you the pitch later, but.
Smoke a big fat joint and watch the video of this later. No, wait for this part.
Oh yeah, no. Here's the inception bit, right? So back in our bootstrap, which is on the V8 side, we're actually going to define our fetch function. And this one's a dumb fetch function, only takes a URL. And then we're going to go ahead and make it work with a promise because I like async await and I'd rather never deal with a callback again. And so all that this is doing is it's creating a new promise. And if you haven't seen this before, since we are in modern JavaScript, we can return a promise, and then JavaScript knows what to do if you create an async function and call await to wait for this, and you don't have to nest your code too much. So what we do is we create a promise which takes another fat arrow callback that takes resolve and reject. And all we're doing is making a callback within V8 to tell Node to call when the HTTP request is done. So right now we're saying call this function when you're done doing your stuff. And this function lives within V8. I should probably diagram this. This gets really complicated. And in this case, all we're doing is we're just going to reject the error of that, and then we're going to resolve the promise with the parsed version of the response if we get anything. And so, like, obviously, if we don't get valid JSON, this will explode and it'll yell at us, but that's okay. And then basically, this is not anything. I'm editing this as I do it because I kept leaving it lingering. Nobody else leaves code around, do they? Never. Then we're just calling fetch apply. So this just says go ahead and send these arguments to it. There's no this context for that, so we're going to do that. So if I did all this right, what we're actually going to see is you're going to see console from two different sources. You're going to see Node saying, hey, I'm doing stuff, and you're going to see V8 say, hey, I got stuff. So I'd call it native there and Node there. Native and Node are the same thing. Should clean that up too. Native just saying, look, we're handling fetch. Node got its HTTP response, which has all the headers and things. And all I'm calling here is our website, so you'll see all the headers we get. And then body was null because I wanted to log this before. Down at the bottom, V8 says, hey, I got this response from Node. Status is 200. It was 76K because we embed a lot of fonts. That's changing soon. That site's huge. Anyway, so we got our fetch to work with our full thing. And then I can show you what the actual example code did there. This example was just with a normal callback, so it's fetch.then, so we're going to just handle the promise directly. But we can also just do the promise version, because I think that looks a lot nicer, and I think it's a lot easier to build. So we can do, what number was that? 4. So this is just fetch, but implement with promises. So it does exactly the same thing, it's just to kind of show that promises work. And then we've got, oh yeah, I didn't make import work for this one. The way we actually solved import for our own purposes was just to bundle things with Webpack. So what we actually hand V8 is a JavaScript file that we've let Webpack generate, and Webpack handles all the import and require stuff. So basically, we just made something kind of work that would have taken 5 minutes in Node. The trick is we can do all sorts of clever stuff with our fetch. Like we can limit them to only fetching things that they own, or we can limit them to only fetching HTTPS, or we can do all sorts of other crazy stuff. And in our actual code, our fetch is pretty complicated for that reason, because we both need to limit what they're talking to, we need to handle caching, and then we need to handle streaming when they get back big responses. Because apparently the first thing most people try is running a giant 10 gig file through a proxy every time. It seems obvious. So that's like I said, stupid small example. And like I said, there is a multi-threaded sorting function. It might give you a better idea of how you can make a whole bunch of V8s interact. But I wanted to make something work without spending all day. So
when you say a bunch of V8s, you're talking about these like
isolates,
yeah, little virtual machines.
Yeah, mm-hmm. And so you can do like 16 threads within their thing, basically, because everybody wants threads, right? All right. So there's actually a lot we didn't cover too. What's been really interesting about doing this is handling memory leaks, because when you do things like take a reference from one isolate and then use it in Node and even pass it in another isolate, you basically made the garbage collector stupid. It doesn't know how to handle that. So you actually have to be really careful cleaning up your own references, or the garbage collector will never clean stuff up. Like an array buffer within V8, if you pass a reference back to Node with it and then you stick that in another isolate, it'll just never go away unless you clean up all the references and let it do its job. And this has been like a month of our lives at various times over the last year, being like, crap, there's some this is growing and it shouldn't be. And the interesting thing about proxies is you make a lot of references to stuff. So memory leaks memory is an interesting thing to think about when you are doing embedded V8. The other thing is when you're running V8, like you can do a lot with a very little RAM within V8. You just have to be really careful if you're not copying data a lot. So when you do things like convert strings from UTF-8 to ASCII or convert a buffer to UTF-8, you're actually making a lot of copies of that data if you're not careful. So some of the polyfills we've actually used for things like text encoding would take like a 1 meg string and then blow up the isolate just by converting it once, because it was just incredibly inefficient. So it's been fun to get back, I think. I haven't done stuff where I care about memory getting copied in a long time. It's actually kind of fun to work on stuff that needs that stuff. And
Nerd.
Huge nerd, right? I know. I mean, just.c++ soon. It'll be cool. And as you might expect, people put crap on npm that should never be run ever. So just like, and like it's easy because in a browser context, you're not running these processes for like 3 weeks at a time, and people have a lot of RAM. So yeah, npm is good and bad. And then the event loops, like I said, isolated VM takes a lot of care of it, but you have to be really careful to let async stuff finish before you clean up the isolate, or you'll start getting weird errors. In my case, I just set a 3-second timeout on our processes because everything I was doing would be done in less than 3 seconds. But we actually track like all the timers someone gives outside of the V8 and make sure that stuff's all finished before we kill their environment effectively. So lots of lowish level stuff, low level node. Here's stuff to learn more. Basically, isolated VM is that repo I talked about. I think he wrote it for a game called Screep. It was like, oh, this will be like a fun weekend, few hundred line project for this game, which is, it's a little bit like the game of life where you write your JavaScript to control your little things and kill other people's little things. And he's been working on it for like a year now, and it's thousands of lines of code as it happens. The V8 embedding guide is really useful for concepts of how V8 works. It's probably like if you write any node or anything for the browser, it's probably really useful to understand these things anyway. So I'd highly recommend reading that. It's not real implementation specific. It's very conceptual. It talks about isolates. It talks about context, what they're meant for. And then I would check out things like the Fetch API spec and just kind of imagine how you might implement some of those. We've implemented several different things, and we kind of match that API as much as we can. And then you'll try us out. We actually have an open source component of this. You can download one of the things that we heard from people that didn't like CDNs. This is the selling slide, by the way. So get some pizza. Here we go. One of the things we didn't like about CDNs back in the day, and one of the things we kept hearing from people was, I hate that I can push a button and break my whole site. I hate that I can't test everything I do locally. I hate that I can't run it through like a CI process. I hate that I don't have a deploy thing. So we actually built, we run our full environment locally to develop our stuff now. And then you run your tests, you do continuous integration with whatever, with Jenkins, if you're into Jenkins, or we use BuildKite for a lot of stuff. And then you actually can deploy it roll back really fast. So we actually deploy with across the world in under a few seconds. And then the APIs we've given people, were like the very first example. We let them rewrite HTML. We let them do a lot with resizing and cropping and optimizing of images. We're actually going to roll out a font API because if you saw our site in particular is like 77K because there's an embedded font there. But we can do neat things like read what's in the hero on a page, find out exactly which characters it needs, and then pluck those characters out of the font file and embed those only. That'd save like 75K of that, and still have a nice font.
Hang on. Can I stop you right there?
Yeah.
Because in everything that you've done, I've completely missed the point.
He's like a manager or something.
I completely missed the point of why I should care about that because I'm not a developer. And you just explained it.
Yes, so our whole company exists to make things fast because time, like low latency, means more money. That's kind of the...
You just explained that in like, but damn.
That was the font thing was kind of my, I had a little bit of an epiphany when we started doing this.
Genius example.
Yeah. Yeah.
Those things are freaking huge for 3 freaking icons.
Yes.
And I hate it when people use them.
Yeah. Me too, actually.
Seriously.
I was yelling.
It's a real pain in my ass.
I was like, do we really need this font? Like, I don't care to use it. Do people care about this? But it's nice to have special fonts, so. It's awesome. It is.
It is awesome, but when I could put 3 freaking pings on the page instead.
Yes, or yeah. So yeah, you'll be able.
Yes.
Soon you'll be able to use us to pluck the exact characters out of the font file you need and embed them in the page, and not have all the extra characters.
But post cache, I won't care.
Post cache, you won't care.
Once the file's downloaded from a CDN, sorry.
Right.
I
yes.
won't care.
Yeah, you won't, except that like if you're anything like every other site, that's post cache hits are not as frequent as you would want them to be. So most sites, we were at ours, for example, I think something like 65% of page views were first page loads. It was nutty.
The cache gets dumped way more frequently than people think.
Right. And particularly,
it doesn't last as long as you hope.
The hard thing about fonts is it's actually difficult to do them progressively. So one of the things I'd really love to be able to do is not use a custom font when the page first loads, and then like push that font file to them with HTTP2, and then let it show up the next time. But what I'd rather do is just embed the exact font things I need and not ever worry about it again. So yeah, it's you'd be surprised how many page loads are not cached as well as you want them to be. Anyway. But yes, post-cache you wouldn't care.
Oh.
But yeah, you would run us actually in place of a CDN because
See, I
you
hate
can
this
implement
because I
lots
didn't
of
want you to do, I didn't want you to do a pitch, and now I'm totally fascinated. And I want you to do a bloody pitch and tell me why I should care.
Right, speed. If you care about speed, we've actually found it's interesting. It's been like 10 years now. Amazon did this study about like every 100 milliseconds of latency cost them 1% of sales, and people don't even track their page load speeds very well. Because you've gotten like, particularly this thing's gotten more dynamic. So one of the things we've been helping people with is pre-rendering React because for both search engine purposes and also for quick page loads. So like Netflix doesn't even ship React client side anymore. They pre-render stuff with React and have their own like stripped down JavaScript library for all the interactions. And this is just all stuff we want to enable developers to do, like at the edge, effectively. So yeah, there's the pitch. And like I said, it's open source. You can actually go download the core. You could put it in production if you want to spin up a bunch of servers. I don't know why you would do that, but you could.
Well,
For
if
my
it's
10
open,
gigabyte file.
Yeah, exactly.
if
Which
it's open
works.
source, why
Made
do
that
I-
work.
If it's open source, why do I need you?
Because we have data centers everywhere, and so you pay us per microsecond or per millisecond you run stuff instead of having to spin up servers in 20 places.
That's a business.
There's still the CDN.
Correct.
It's
Yeah,
still the CDN.
we are the CDN. We just run your code.
And you want me to get addicted to it locally?
Yes, it's basically it's the free crack business model.
Right.
Tell your
Yes.
friends.
Tell your friends. Here's some extras. Yeah.
Okay, now I get it. Okay.
Yeah. Well, thank you for getting it. Thank you for letting me pitch the thing we worked so hard on. It's funny because like all of this makes all of the things I just told you relevant, but it's shameless shilling too. So that's it. Thank you. Do we have any questions?
I have a ill-formed question probably. So if I'm not running, I'm looking for other applications
Yeah.
in my head. So if I'm not letting people run arbitrary code,
Correct.
I don't have to be quite as clever.
No.
I don't have to be really clever at all, actually. I could-
That is probably true, yes.
Oh.
What we found, so we actually started building this, we tried to incrementally get to what we want to actually let people run code. And particularly for like a CDN, what we found is the number of things people were asking for and legitimately needed way surpassed our ability to build them. It was a very broad set of kind of mid-level features. So I think there's a lot of apps where you don't have developers using it, or so no one could write code, or there's a lot of things that just don't have that huge amount of potential applications that people are going to ask for that you would just never consider using. But it is kind of fun.
No, I wasn't saying it was. I didn't mean it was
Oh,
in a bad
oh
way.
yeah, no, I didn't think so.
I was just trying to think of. It is a way to deploy little bits of functionality way out at the edge.
Yes.
Which might be interesting.
Yeah, I thought it was. I mean, we built the company to do that, so I agree. That's interesting. Other questions? Yes.
Okay. So, not being very developer, and I
Yeah.
apologize to everyone.
That's okay.
listening. So, in the world of cloud and hybrid computing,
Yep.
so you've got people on-prem, you've got people in the cloud. IBM's theory was that what they would do is they would actually, so instead of putting your data in the cloud, you would run your app in the cloud, send the code to the data, and it would basically do everything on-prem for you and send back the answer.
Yes.
Can you do that?
Kind of. Yeah, actually, sort of. So one of the
So if I've got a really
trying to-
shitty rendering process
Yep.
for my web page, I could basically give it to you, you could do it faster and get it back to me.
correct. Yes. I'm not sure it's the best application. Yeah, that'd be like Lambda.
Yes.
For you, it's Azure Functions.
Yeah, Lambda's fine. I know what Lambda is. Piss off.
So, like, I have very interesting thoughts on serverless stuff and Lambda and all that. Well, we accidentally built a serverless product because we wanted to expose a very specific CDN level feature that people just don't have access to. We're not really a generic run your code function thing like Lambda or whatever Azure's is called, or Google Cloud Functions. So like you could do it, I probably wouldn't. We work really well between your end users and your apps. And also I wouldn't trust IBM, that's the other. just in general.
So I know your presentation is over because it says thank you and you're taking questions, but I'd love to see an example, man. I know I saw on your site there's like a little npm install fly. And
Yep.
I'd love to see
All right,
what
let's
that
see what we've got here.
You've got an hour of improv right now. 50 minutes.
Or if you could make a picture of how the pieces work together.
And I'd like to see it process this 32 gigabyte.
Oh, would you?
file.
I don't know how good the internet here is. I would totally do that.
I'd like it to run my virtual machine, please.
So we actually made this little comic because one of the very first things we were pitching people on. It turns out, like, if you've ever tried to run a user-facing website and you have like a blog that's hosted on WordPress and you have docs that are hosted somewhere else and you have a support system that's hosted somewhere and then you've got some weird media company in Boston doing your marketing site, it's actually very difficult to combine all that onto a single domain. And if anyone's like me, you've tried that with like Nginx, you've tried that with the proxy, you've tried that with Apache and their awful rewrite rules. And so one of the very first things we made easy was the ability to mount all your apps on different paths of your domain. And then we made a Lord of the Rings inspired cartoon for doing this, which is kind of, we have a really good illustrator that is actually a huge Lord of the Rings nerd too. I saw her put the smackdown on someone. It was very impressive. So we made onehostname.com just to because it's like a very stupidly simple problem that everyone probably has that's way harder to solve than it should be. And this right here is actually a Fly app. And so what I will do here is you saw it live. I'll just run, not Floyd. Oh, I need to install it. Look at that.
You can't type your own
I
company
can't.
name.
Not while everyone's staring at me.
You clearly picked it because it's
Everybody
easy to
turn
spell.
around. I find myself saying on the fly a lot now too, and then I feel stupid after. Like that was.
Do a wink and
Yeah.
we'll do it on the fly.
Oh, Jesus.
This will probably build isolated VM, which will be fun. Because that's all C++ bindings for V8. It's interesting I don't have Fly installed in this. Oh yeah, here we go. Now it's a party.
What's the tech F?
Hmm?
In the npm
Dash
install
F.
tech F.
Hack?
I say tech. I'm sorry.
I do.
Dash F.
Oh,
What is
that's
that?
me typoing G. That's what it is.
I was like, this guy's smart. I've never
He's
seen
smarter
that
than me. I
one.
wasn't going to ask him that.
No, I'm really.
Originally, I was like, I'm going to tell him he can just write npmi. But then you did the tech F, and I was like, holy shit, this guy knows some stuff.
Yeah, right.
I don't know if you noticed, but I spelled install properly on the first try. So
Right,
I
so
just
you
need
just
my
do
wins
npmi,
right
tech G. It works.
Yep. Now we're gonna watch it install isolated VM again. It's kind
Didn't
of
fail this time.
No
Oh, yeah, it did.
piece of crap.
No, it didn't fail. It's just warnings. It's Apple and their stupid Xcode crap. While that's installing, I will show you one host name. How's that? Let's see what I've got here. Ooh. All right. So a basic Fly app starts with just an index JavaScript file. Oh, that's interesting. I don't know what happened there. We just have a basic JavaScript file, and the magic of our stuff is just this fly.hp.respond with, and all it takes is a function that takes a request and returns a response, and that's it. It can be an async function too. And so what we did with this is we just made a little bit. We did a force SL handler, and then we did a route mounts handler that we're going to iterate through here to see what it's actually doing. Force SSL does what you would think. It just checks if the protocol is HTTPS if we're not in development, and redirects if it isn't. The mounts are more interesting. So these are we set up an example Heroku app. We set up an example just generic hostname app called example.com. The example, if you use surge.sh, Surge is a really easy way to publish static sites. Example debug, and then we're actually going to route the root to a GitHub Pages backend. And so these are just functions in our backends file that basically what happens when you're proxying these things is you need to get the headers right. So like Heroku wants the host header to be app.herokuapp.com, but then they want the forwarded host header to be whatever the end user actually requested. And then Surge doesn't want an X-forward host header. It just wants its own host, which is throwing. The generic stuff just assumes that you know what you're doing, and we're not going to set any special headers for you. GitHub Pages is really freaking complicated, because what happens when you set up a GitHub Pages site is if you create a CNAME, it wants you to send like the CNAME as the host header and no directory path. If you don't create a CNAME, what it wants you to send is the organization ID.github.io and then / whatever the repository is. So what we did is we made a backend here that actually tries to fetch as if there's no CNAME, because GitHub will redirect you if it is. It detects that there was a redirect, and then it caches in our cache. It caches that this repository needs a CNAME, and then it refetches as if you were doing it right the first time. And this was interesting because when we built this in our app the first time, we were actually trying to detect what mode GitHub Pages was in when we let people set it up, which was really, it wasn't very accurate because it would change. I mean, and we needed to like figure out how to redo that every 30 minutes. What we're doing here is we're just caching that we found this for 5 minutes, and then we'd recheck it every time there's a new page load.
So when you're proxying to whatever the CNAME might be,
Yep.
and then you find out whether or not you needed a CNAME, like do you need to go through all that trouble? I mean, if you've got either the GitHub IO or whatever, the name.github.com
Yeah.
or whatever it is versus the actual domain name, don't you end up getting whatever it is you need?
No, so if you do org.github.io/repository, it will redirect you to the CNAME if there is one.
Right.
Okay? If you just do org.github.io, it won't give you anything because it doesn't know which repository to go look for. So you actually have to send it the CNAME as the host header.
Okay.
Which we do just right here. We just set the host header to whatever we got for the CNAME effectively. So this is a really simple way of solving this problem, was kind of the fun thing there. All right, cool. So we're going to run this locally now. Probably. Look at that. So really, this is now booted a Fly server on port 3000 because that's where you start servers on locally. We have a .fly.yaml file with some config stuff. We actually loaded the V8 app bundle, which is sort of like the Bootstrap I showed you, which is where we expose all the APIs for this stuff. And then we loaded our apps compiled bundle down there. So if I go visit, this is going to be the least shocking thing ever. If I go visit localhost 3000, you will see exactly the same thing. Right? Yeah. But if I go to Heroku, you'll see that one. And it will actually show which, because I've sent that X-forward host.
That's the, okay.
If I go to Surge, it'll show that one. Oh, that's such a tiny text.
That's why you've made it so fast, there's nothing there.
Yes, that's exactly right. We speed things up by taking them out. We've got Example, which is just example.com, which is a fantastic host. I don't even know who hosts that, but I use it all the time. I actually made a debug handler, which just shows what all my stuff is. I assume that cookie is not important. And that one just, all that really did, my debug handler here, is just write some crap back out very, very simply. Because it's frequently nice to see which headers we're actually sending to backend requests, especially when we're trying to debug all of these different routes. So yeah, this is a stupidly simple thing for.
Is this a common use case? I know you said you kind of set this up for this kind of interesting use case.
Yes.
But is this common?
This is actually really common. A lot of people. This is the little bit of epiphany people have about how they can make their lives easier sometime. Because a lot of people have tried to solve this. Yeah. Particularly with third-party hosted content. So it's a lot easier to do if you run all your own apps behind a proxy. But a lot of people just, like I said, do stuff on.
We don't end up running into like a whole bunch of weird CORS stuff or something, or a lot of. No, actually, this solves a lot of CORS problems. We've actually had people use this. So we had at least one customer would put all of their files on S3, and then they wanted to manipulate them with JavaScript, and they were having huge CORS headaches. So they actually ran S3 on their own hostname. Because basically the browser is only talking to the one host name, and what we do is we proxy them to either S3 or their other app. It solves a lot of CORS headaches, which is fun.
Is this multi-threaded?
Oh yeah, this is, so when you,
So when you go out to 5 sites, you're doing it simultaneously.
oh, well, for this one, no, because we're only requesting, I actually have an example of that. For this one, you're only going to one site each time because we're just deciding to send you to Heroku when you go to that one URL, or to GitHub when you're going to a different URL. But I do have a parallel fetch here. Let me go. This is actually our app. This is actually our site on our site. So we're fly on V8 on V8.
You're sick.
This was actually kind of fun. I got really irritated because it's really hard to keep documentation in sync across sites. I want this one because we have our GitHub repo, which is already that's the only repo I visit. Right, we have our README here that has, it's a really good introduction to the app and what it always does. And then we also have our user-facing docs, which I got really tired of not being the same as our README. So this is just our README. So what happens when you load this page is we fetch, in parallel, we fetch a template file from our site, and then we fetch the README from GitHub. And then we actually render the markdown and embed it right back in the template file, and then send that back to the user.
That's cool.
So yeah, that's definitely parallel. It goes out to both places at once, and then just finishes when it gets both responses.
So what we saw last month about Graph.io, GraphQL, it wasn't here. I got half the words. Whatever. The point of that is being able to aggregate multiple feeds into one.
So that's how Condé Nast is using it. They have a lot of REST APIs. They want to expose this one unified GraphQL API to their front-end devs. And this is a really nice layer.
You make that faster.
We make that work.
Possible.
It's like, yeah. It's faster too, but we make that work. Because it's like, a lot of times these APIs are stuff that nobody ever wants to touch because they've been running for 12 years. I know, I wrote one of them. They've been running for 12 years, and no one really knows how they work anymore.
I gotta tell you, I have a use case for this. Like
Nobody
tomorrow.
used APIs 12 years ago. What are you talking about?
What? Yes, we did. They were just REST.
It was soap. It was soap, wasn't it?
No, we just invented our own thing. It was fine.
Lots
It
of
was
that. Put it in
perfect.
the URL.
Yeah, and then we argued over whether the content type was application JSON or text JSON, because that's really important.
Query equals.
Yes. So for the GraphQL implementation, they actually do something like this. If they need to pull from multiple APIs,
Yes.
they'll form the request, like pull them all down at once, and then combine them into one response.
Right. See, this is your sales pitch. I'm
Depends who I'm talking
I'm
to.
proposing this shit for tomorrow.
Nice. Yeah, it's very fun. Like a lot of this. So one of the things that really triggered me way back in the day was Amazon. Back when this was called a service-oriented architecture and not microservices, Amazon's homepage would actually load, and then you'd see things like recommended items in the sidebar, and then you'd see other stuff specific to you. And all this was personalized, and all this was back-end services that they assembled on the fly. And what they actually did was they did things like implement latency budgets. So if the recommended items didn't come back in 15 milliseconds, they showed something else instead. They showed kind of a fallback thing. And that stuff it's impossible for mortals to get access to those things because nobody can afford Akamai, basically. And nobody can build stuff at a big a scale as Amazon could justify at the time. So yeah, a lot of that, like multiple things fetched and combined, was like a lot of things I wanted to solve.
So you were running this locally?
Yes.
On your port 3000? I mean, you've got all this set up, then where does the service part of it, like when do I have to give you money?
You have to give us money when you deploy, and I will go do that because that's how brave I am.
Is that going to take a while? Because I have another question.
No, actually, it'll be very fast.
Damn it.
But first, I'm going to test to make sure I didn't screw anything
Is that
up.
pretty fly?
That's pretty super fly for a white guy. See, all my tests pass, so I'm going to deploy. And then I'm actually going to check the site to make sure I didn't commit something I shouldn't have. Anyway, other question.
So let's say I have a really stupid use case and I need to get 1,000 records from an API because I have some dumbass customer.
By the way,
that
it's
wants
deployed
that.
in Singapore now.
Stop that. Let's say I want 10,000 records
Yes.
because my customer's really dumbass.
Yes.
Can I give that to you in 5 chunks that you could do asynchronously and serve it back to me faster?
Yeah, probably. It depends.
It's
So
gonna be the same amount.
No, because I could give you 1 to 2,000, 2001 to whatever.
Yeah.
5 chunks that then could get put together. You can give me parallelism, whatever.
yeah, if
That.
it can be parallelized, yes. So if you need to go 5 different places to get those chunks,
Right, because the fetch API does streaming too, right?
yes.
So you could technically just do it with.
So yeah, if you're trying to combine 5 different sources, we can do all those at the same time and put them into one response.
Right,
If you have
right.
one source of the 1,000 records, you probably wouldn't want to do it that way. What you probably want to do is start sending chunks to me, and then we'll send the chunks right to the user, or you want to send us the whole response, and then we'll actually send chunks to the user as fast as they can get them.
Yeah, he's not being smart.
Yeah, no.
No blockchain.
No, you're not watching.
So yeah, this is, by the way, go to preview.fly.io if you do it. And our pricing is
So cheap.
not formatted. It is super cheap. It's how many was that?
Reasonable.
3 micro
I don't even
pennies.
know what that means. And
You can
that's
thank
what-
Amazon for this. So basically, you can run an app for the full month. So like if you have people making requests for every millisecond of the month, it's $9.
How many?
It doesn't matter. Well, I mean, you could have one person running one long-lived like SSE thing where they're just streaming stuff back, I guess. But typically, that's a lot more people than
What the hell is an execution second?
That's how long we're running our code. You said you knew what Lambda was.
I know what Lambda is, but I have developers that use it. Shut up.
The point is it's basically free. You shouldn't worry about it. You should get using it and then just pay us
If
what we
it's
tell
free,
you.
what's in it for you?
He said it's the free crack model, man.
Yeah, no.
No, this
Ultimately,
isn't free crack.
ultimately, you just wire up your bank account. Oh, we also give you the first 2 million, like the first $25 free, which actually works for a really long time for
Hang on,
most
if it's
small.
$9 a month and he gives us $25 free.
Wait, it's $9 a month, but probably not. It depends how busy your app is. So if your app runs all month, if you have one person making a request every millisecond of the month, it's $9.
So you just need a new Hotmail address every.
Yeah, that's fine.
$25.
If you want to go to that work.
Well, I can automate that.
But yeah, it's actually cheaper than Lambda for basically an equivalent type thing.
Okay.
And bandwidth is way cheaper.
Except it's not running generic functions for you, it's running functions to process your
Correct.
CDN. It's
Yes.
doing a specific job.
Mhm. Here, I'll show you another problem.
Not exactly the same thing, but does it compete with Google App Engine in any way?
Not really. The most similar thing, Cloudflare just released service workers. So
Yes,
Cloudflare
they
started on
did.
this. Do what?
Yes, they're awesome.
We started on this as severe, I know the guy who built that, and then they kind of started down this path, and we started a company back in January. And we have like 80 Cloudflare employees signed up, so they're very quick to see things we're doing, which is fun.
Did you just say you started this in January?
Of last year.
Oh, okay. I'm like, God damn!
This
Makes you feel like a slacker, doesn't
yeah,
it?
this current iteration we started in
I sleep.
October.
You know, it's a terrible thing.
We've written 4 proxies in a year and a half, so. So we started with Nginx and Lua, we went to a Go-based proxy, now we're back to Node and V8, because it's impossible to run V8 in Go.
Seems like you would be the guy to find a way.
I had never needed to care, actually.
So I had a question about your Amazon example.
Yes.
How would this kind of thing fit in to make their life better?
Well,
I didn't follow that part.
So what this does is it would let you do what they do. It's less like they've already solved this problem because they have a fleet of developers that don't like working there that spend all their time on it. So what Amazon is able to do is assemble their page for you specifically with things that are very specific to your interests, and also keep it fast by ensuring that if one chunk of the page isn't coming back quick enough, they just don't send it. So this is a little bit what he's talking about. So when you come to our site, or someone goes to your site that's running this, you can go back to all your backend services. You can put one page together for the user and send it over, and you can ignore the bits like the backend services aren't fast enough.
So you do no XHR on the client.
Correct.
You just get the static page, or at least
Yes.
initially.
Yes. Which is honestly the way they're doing it is probably what you would probably do now is use us to pre-render React instead and assemble the page that way instead of whatever 2004 stuff they were doing. But yeah, similar type concept.
Or I guess since you're also a CDN,
Yep.
you could conceivably give a timeout in the back end and serve some static data.
Exactly. Yeah.
So I could still XHR.
Yeah, and actually
and they could just give me a flat image instead of the latest
right.
feed, whatever that is.
Exactly. And the intent of a lot of this is you should actually be able to serve like stale cache data. So
Right.
hopefully if you've seen a user before, you know something for them, even if it's not the most fresh. Or you can just serve something generic. Doesn't matter.
So is say I'm a customer in that scenario, and I've got 100,000 users.
Yep.
Every hour, so many users. Does it cost me more if I have more users? I don't know how CDNs are priced.
Yes.
So I think you're holding a lot of memory for me.
Correct. So CDN, the way we bill is you're billed by how much you have stored in the cache, bandwidth we transfer to users, and then the amount of time your code's running, which is actually really close to how CDNs bill, which is like the big expense on most of these things is bandwidth. So if you have 100,000 users in a very tiny site, you might not pay as much as someone with 1,000 users and serving big images or big videos, but effectively the more users you have, the more your bill would go up relative
Just
to your
because
other
of
users.
transfer.
Yes, exactly.
Gotcha.
Yep.
Thanks.
Cool. Yes.
Completely unrelated. I know you didn't start writing JavaScript in VS Code.
No. I was doing
One of the things we've talked about is having people come up and talk about why they use their IDE and why they love it. Why? I tell you what, the number of people I have immense respect for, that JavaScript developers that use VS Code as their IDE, is really beginning to convince me that VS Code is just the way to go. Why? Please.
So I was a Vim user forever, and I switched to VS Code particularly because its support for TypeScript and JavaScript is amazing for like autocomplete.
Via Sublime.
Do what? No, I didn't.
Sublime?
I actually went via. I think I tried everything, but nothing ever stuck. So like I tried Atom for a week and thought it was a big fat pig and didn't want to use my battery. VS Code is nice because it doesn't feel heavy. It's super fast. Has really good extensions.
I mean, it is Atom though.
It's Electron, but
It's Electron.
better developers than the GitHub ones, I guess, doing it. It's way faster. It's way snappier than Atom, and I don't.
Yeah, no, I know.
It's ridiculous.
So you never went to Sublime?
I did not go to Sublime. No, I was on MacVim for basically forever, and then did VS Code specifically when I started getting so heavy into JavaScript because it's really good at JavaScript.
That's awesome.
And TypeScript especially. TypeScript. I've always like Microsoft's always been really good at languages, and it's neat to see
Their
one that
own
people.
language. It's
Yes.
very, very good.
Oh no, even
Visual Studio is the best IDE out there. It's
Yeah,
just
it's pretty
only
crazy
any
good.
good if you're doing .NET.
Yeah, so I actually did F# way back in the day and learned to
Oh,
really
yeah.
like older languages.
Well, originally, so I was a classic ASP guy. And
Yep.
Of course,
I would've liked
when
it.
ASP.NET
It went
came
too
out,
far.
we all were like, oh, VB all the way, what's this C#? So, yeah, no, Visual Studio,
And I can actually
the actual Visual Studio is an
Yes.
amazing product. And before Visual Studio Code, the closest thing to that type of experience was WebStorm.
WebStorm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I really like TypeScript. So anyone who hasn't used TypeScript, like I love my types. I like compilers that tell me when I've done something appropriately. We actually document our whole CLI by creating TypeScript definitions, which is kind of fun.
That's fun.
So this is actually our documentation is a TypeScript definition for the APIs we expose to people, and then we generate the docs from that. And it's one of the nicest ways I've ever found to do this stuff.
Almost Go-like.
It is. It actually looks like Rust too. It's really interesting, and a lot like C#, which would follow because it's the same guy.
Right.
But yes, I really like TypeScript. Other questions?
That aren't about Fly? Sure.
Sure. You got time.
We've paid for you till 8:30.
Dance monkey!
Don't see me drinking enough beer though.
This has been fascinating.
Yeah.
It is so much more interesting to see what people have done with JavaScript
that just your imagination wouldn't even comprehend.
I
Right.
think he's got a buzz on.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. Oh, this is so much more
The fly
interesting.
buzz.
And this is how you program TypeScript. Yeah, whatever.
He
Okay.
doesn't really like this meetup because it's usually this is how you program TypeScript.
No.
We can do that real fast.
No, I care more about what you can do with things rather
Oh, yeah.
than how you do things.
You're a big picture guy. You got the
Yes. Yes.
Manager.
Yeah.
Material.
That's actually been my favorite thing about the V8 stuff is like it's really interesting what you can do with JavaScript in JavaScript that I'd never even considered before. That was the pretty crazy.
Right,
thing.
and the fact that you've gone through that set of languages and still come back to Node is pretty amazing.
Yeah, Node's a lot better than it used to be. JavaScript is way better than it used to be like 7 years ago. Async await is amazing. So I was going to show you his.
Yeah, except for if you have to transpile.
Do what?
Have you ever looked at the transpile?
Oh yeah, but
ES5.
it's native to V8. I'm
No,
ES5.
I understand. I'm saying it's great unless I don't use it in development because of the
Oh right.
the transpilation of ES5.
Yeah, that's the nice thing about your own JavaScript runtime is you can just use what you want. There's no transpilation. I'm sure when this is actually that guy's. I should just run this. Hang on a minute. We'll see if this works. Way off script here.
All of those words make sense to me. I just don't know what they mean.
I can't spell parallel either.
Oh yeah, that's a hard one. It's like banana.
Embedding.
No, wait. L.
Oh, I can't run this right now.
It said please.
copy
Who
it off
writes
that one.
error messages?
I'm not
with
actually. I think
please
you might have to
in them?
actually pass that to. We'll see if it's actually.
See, I was telling you. You can just
What?
copy it.
Wait, now
Yeah,
these
I like
error
how-
messages, hey dumbass.
I like how it's smart enough to tell me what I need to do, but can't just do it.
Where's the double tag fix flag?
Right? It's like just run that for me. All right.
Ow!
Oh, he's running
The
on
worst
master.
linter
Isolated
ever.
VM. I really want this to work. Oh, he's running against his own master. All right, that's good. We don't have 10 minutes to build this thing. That's going to take a while. But yeah, that parallel sort's worth checking out. Anywho,
So, do you have any like client success stories that moved over to this, like seriously reduced their response time and or
oh
reliability?
yeah, actually, so one of the giant wins for people is now that every website has to be SSL. Actually, doing SSL is slow unless you do it globally. So we have a lot of people that have just sped everything up specifically by doing SSL. Like the app isn't all that important, which is kind of interesting. So one called Post Haven does it. They have like 5,000 blogs they host. We handle SSL for all of them. There's a company called Speaker Deck that I don't think their new version's not out yet, but they're basically what they're doing is they're the ones that did the responsive image stuff. And what they've done is they've like vastly lowered response times on their site. It's very image heavy. So what it does is it takes presentation decks, converts into images, and lets you click through them on the browser. And it used to be they'd take like a big screenshot of each slide and then just serve that to people. And now they take a big screenshot of each slide and then serve exactly the right size that they need for people. And in fact, one of the giant wins is WebP, if anyone's ever messed with image formats. Let me see if I have this example somewhere. WebP is like 40% smaller for Chrome and other WebKit users than like PNGs or JPEGs usually are. So I copy all this code for our site. Seemed fair. What we actually do, let's see where it is. Now we actually, we get, if the browser accepts WebP, we actually convert images to WebP before we send it back to them, then and store the cache copy of that. It's because this Speaker Deck had such a good success rate. It was like 40% smaller images for free.
So you generate it on the first request and then save it. If the first person to show up that can, first person with Chrome shows up and they can do WebP,
Correct.
you generate it then and then save it, and then later you're not
Yeah,
generating
so you
it
can
again.
see we do, if we do allow WebP here, we actually, we put that in the cache key. Which is, it's fun. Yeah. So
when are you gonna sell an on-prem corporate version of this?
As soon as someone wants it. But the thing is like, which on-prems have like
Doesn't
multiple
matter.
data
If I'm running,
centers?
just what you've described right there, if I'm running an on-prem intranet
Yeah.
on SharePoint 2016,
Oh.
because I
Sounds
can,
like
because
a-
I'm very rich.
Sounds like a tiny budget.
No, it isn't. Okay, those are the people you really care about.
So you can actually use our open source thing to do this exactly right now.
No, I
on-prem.
can't.
Okay, we can do that exactly right now on-prem. So now.
Okay, good. Just checking.
You have a lot of .gov compliance, is that what you're saying?
There's compliance. There's a fucking awesome thing that you could do with this.
Yeah.
No, I don't know what you're talking about.
I just shuddered a
Okay,
little.
well, all right. So let's have him. Let's have him proxy everything that he can possibly do, and scrape out PII as it comes through.
Yeah, we basically
All right.
you can do one entry point for everything, and start.
You know the conversation we were having about that company that Salesforce bought?
Yeah.
That could be him.
We actually already. So this is logs globally. It's kind of fun. You can see every hit as it comes in, and you can customize this too.
No one's
Or ship
using
it
the
up.
site. It's not changing.
Oh, one host name's tiny. I don't know how big ours is either. We'll see. Is the
Thing's
video camera
recording,
still
right?
going? It only updates every 5 seconds, just so you know. regardless of what happens.
Oh, it's not because no one's using it.
So I'll make it. See, look at that. I mean, everyone's late. Everyone's out drinking. It's 8 o'clock on Thursday.
How would this
All
work
right.
with HubSpot?
What'd you say?
HubSpot? How would this work with HubSpot?
This is HubSpot is the marketing company I couldn't remember the name of when I was talking about it. This would work really well in front of HubSpot for the same reason. So a lot of people do want to host all their marketing content on HubSpot, but they can't put everything there because it doesn't do everything they need it to. So like that one host name thing would work really well for HubSpot.
or when it doesn't work.
Or yeah,
Which is
actually,
a big problem.
This works incredibly well for like stuff that breaks because you can store cache versions and never actually go touch it.
Yeah, we were down for 3 days because
Oh,
yeah.
dang, that sounds awful. You could do actually one of the interesting things you can do is you can try HubSpot, and if there's an error, you can actually go try something else. So you could make the request to HubSpot. If there's a 404 or 500 or something, you could actually make the request to like an S3 bucket that has backup static content in it really easily. We should sell that. Be like, this is great for providers that suck.
Yeah.
That's a sticker.
Resiliency over reliability.
Yeah, yeah. It fails in a way you can control. Anyway, all right, cool. Is it still done? Do I push this button now?
If you're done, but people always push it and then keep on showing the stuff.
I'm out of. I have nothing.
So,
You want to give me the others?
thank you very much.
You're welcome.